4 airports will be open for domestic travel during lockdown level 3. They include the OR Tambo and King Shaka international airports. Only passengers and flight-related staff will be allowed in airports, with strict safety measures put in place. Let's get reaction now from the editor of SA Flyer magazine, Guy Leach. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show this afternoon. So, anyone who flies regularly for business is asking a couple of key questions. What is going to be the cost? And that will very largely be determined by the demand. We know there is a meeting set with the airline aviation regulator for about 2 weeks from now to see whether they can regulate tariffs. But how will that be determined in the meantime?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon and nice to be with you. Well, the reality, I think, is very far from the regulations. The reality is that by limiting air travel to only those on business purposes means that they're extremely unlikely to be able to attain anything close to commercially viable loads. The expectation is that loads will be around 30 to 40%, and that's even with the consolidation of flights. So instead of 5 flights in the morning between, say, Johannesburg, Lanseria and Cape Town, it'll only be 1. And even so, I think that at that level they're going to be less than 50% passengers on board, which means that the airlines quite simply are going to choose not to fly. Although, oddly enough, SAA has said that they actually may well continue to fly, but that would be unconscionable given the fact that they will be then further drawing on money that they don't have from taxpayer subsidies. We know that Comair Kalula is already in business rescue. Mango has indicated that they're going to poll or do a survey of business class passengers or business passengers to see how many they might be before they make a decision. I'm really not expecting to see much of a return to flying by the airlines to accommodate the relatively low numbers. I think it's also worth pointing out that business is getting used to the idea of not travelling. We've seen increasing use of webinars and Zoom meetings and so on to obviate the need for travelling. So it's going to take a long time before the airlines actually are prepared to fly this sort of number of passengers.
Added on to that, the fact that accommodation will not be allowed for those travelling for business reasons. So the Minister essentially saying you have to fly in and out on the same day. Is that even worthwhile?
Well, clearly not. You know, if you need to be able to consult all day or do a plant visit or whatever the reason might be, I think it's going to be a further significant detriment to travel. And look at all the other costs that are associated. It's not just the really low loads. So in other words, if an airline normally breaks even at 75% loads, now it's expecting maybe 25% loads, it's going to have to charge 3 times as much for the tickets. On top of that, we've seen all these other regulations in place in terms of deep cleaning and sanitizing the aircraft before and after every flight. We've seen all the limitations in terms of check-ins and so on. So I think there's going to be an enormous detriment to flying any sort of commercial loads, particularly as we've established, people aren't going to be easily able to stay anywhere overnight. It's unlikely.
Is the opening of domestic air travel then purely lip service? What's the point?
I think that government is trying hard to at least enable business to get going. But I think that on the one hand, they've got to balance the need to try and control infection rates or the spread of the disease. And on the other hand, the desire to try and enable people to travel. But there is no easy balance on that. As we've seen, the airlines can only operate on 75, 80% loads. And to do that, they need to carry people for what we in the business call VFR travel. VFR stands in this case for visiting friends and relatives. But if you can't do that, then they're just not going to be able to get the people to make the flights viable. I also need to say, though, that the Civil Aviation Regulator has, much to my surprise, actually come to the party and try to make it possible for the rest of general aviation to get going again. It's unhealthy for aircraft and pilots to sit on the ground for an extended lockdown period. So they have been making concessions there. We have seen post-maintenance flights being permitted, and now we're seeing a return to air for the training schools, which were heavily grounded as well. Now, that's really important because South Africa is a training centre for the whole world's population. We've got vast numbers of Chinese and African students who come to South Africa to train. And it's really good news that those training schools are going to be able to start flying again.
Before I let you go, what do you make of the safety regulations?
The safety regulations are an unhappy compromise, which are, as you said already, probably not working. On the one hand, we've seen the initiatives of organisations like IATA that say that actually air travel can be made safe. You just need to fulfil a whole lot of requirements in terms of social distancing, in terms of making sure that you vet passengers beforehand. On the other hand, they are trying to limit the risk or the spread of the disease by minimising the number of airports and the number of flights. It's an easy compromise. On balance, I have to say that they haven't found a workable solution yet.
All right, thank you very much for your insights. That was the editor of SA Flyer magazine, Guy Leach.